We want to talk about what we do know, Kevin, so I'm going to put you to the pin of your collar now. This, for example, is the 5K limit. Where does this belong on our timeline here?
Well, I think it's almost certain that even though there is still debate around it tonight, that in some form the 5K limit is likely to change from next week. So It's really a trade-off in that NPHET would like if we all still stayed within that 5K exercise limited, but the government are looking at this from a point of view of social cohesion and can they actually give people something. So the way one person put it to me today is that might go to 10, maybe 15, 20, that's still being decided tonight. But really, nothing extra is going to be open in that extra space. So really, you can go walk in a different park for a change. Okay. That's what that's offering to you.
Well, look, we'll take what we can get at this stage. So I'm safe to put that into the next week category. Now, children's sport is another thing that people were very keen to see movement on. Any news on this?
Yeah, so obviously we know the kids are off for Easter holidays again, at the minute out of school again. But it is likely that at some point later in April that they will be allowed back to train in pods again. People remember that happened before at one stage last year. So there won't be any games, it'll be non-contact and they'll be with the same kids all the time. But it is part of the plan as we stand.
So we don't expect this to happen next week, but later in April?
Likely next week, given what NPHET have told the government tonight.
We'll put that there. I won't ask you to use that, Kevin. You'd be glad to know.
Offaly versus Laois there, it won't end well.
No, it won't. Let's not go there. This is a picnic blanket. So we want to know when we can meet people a little more freely. Now, I know there's people watching this who'll say people are doing this anyway. So what is the government going to say, do you think, about meeting with people outside?
And that's part of what's been factored in here, because a lot of people actually don't realise the rule at the minute is if you meet somebody outside, it should be from one other household and it should be for exercise. So you have to keep jogging on the spot, even if you have your coffee. But that will change. Again, it'll probably be later in the month. There was an expectation that it could happen from the 5th of April, from Easter Monday. Now I think we're probably going to push that back a bit.
OK, so I'm going to put that in later in April. Now, construction, I know there's a lot of pressure coming on. We'll be speaking to somebody who is directly affected by this a little bit later. But when it comes to construction and house building in particular, what is the news on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting that this time around we haven't heard much lobbying from the publicans, from a lot of the retailers. I think after the Christmas scare there has been a kind of a general acceptance that the numbers have to get much lower than where they are now before that happens. But the construction sector has been lobbying the government intensely for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so Darragh O'Brien is arguing that they should be allowed to come back from next week. Hard to know, given what they've heard tonight. That's still debated whether it will come next week or later in the month. But I think what is certain is that it will definitely be just housing for a start. So office blocks or anything like that, a big no-no.
OK, so would you say I'm safe putting house building in later in April?
Safe-ish.
Safe-ish. OK, maybe I'll just put it on the edge there, right? And then I have commercial building here as well.
I think that you put that to the edge of May on the other side.
The edge of May. OK, we're getting a clear picture here now. Right, outdoor sports for adults, so things like golf and tennis.
Yes, the lonely sports, where you can go off on a solitary day on your own. The expectation there is that they will come back later in April or maybe into May. You could probably put that on the halfway line again. But up for debate there will of course be you'll have to live within the distance of your golf course or your tennis club, because you won't be able to travel outside it because they're not seen as essential.
Now school, getting everyone back to school, those secondary school students who are remaining, that's one of the priorities we know for government, and that's expected on the 12th of April.
The 12th of April, and that is still the plan. So no matter what else gets shelved as they go on meeting tonight, schools are definitely happening on the 12th of April, unless something dramatic changes over the course of the next week or so. But that's definitely still there.
Well, Kevin, let's get to our wishful thinking section now, right? And I'm going to produce these here, right? Now, what's the news on having a few drinks, eating outdoors?
Well, from what I gather from what NPHET told ministers tonight was that if they mess all of this up, we won't get this. So basically, unless we have this as a very slow-moving process to get all these incremental bits of life back, the hospitality sector, which is hoping maybe for June, won't happen, because we'll have something like we saw at Christmas. So at the moment, you're talking about June at the very, very earliest, but it's not even being discussed tonight. It's not part of the agenda at all. So unfortunately, Claire, you can forget about it.
Right, I'm going to put the pints back. I've just one other thing here now, and this is a hairdryer and hairdressing and barbering. It's just huge for so many people, not least the people who work in those industries, but it's also not really on the agenda, is it?
Not for tonight, no. Really, the timeline you've set out here from April into May, that's what they're really discussing, because what NPHET essentially told them was that they need another 6 to 8 weeks to see how this develops, to see what happens with the B117 variant, and to see what happens with the numbers that are stuck versus ramping up vaccination, which we've heard that horrible phrase from everybody in the HSE and everywhere, Q2. Well, Q2 starts next week.
Yeah.
And that's when they tell us that the vaccination rollout will ramp up. They want to see what happens for 6 to 8 weeks,
well, look,
and then we'll talk about hairdressers.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to put that away as well with the pints.